The ticking of the mantelpiece clock was the only sound that dared to challenge the silence of 221B, Baker Street. It was a persistent, unhurried rhythm, counting out the seconds of the fading London evening. Outside, the city was a study in muffled shadows. A thick, yellowish fog had rolled in from the river, wrapping the gas lamps in hazy coronas and deadening the usual clamor of the streets. The sound of a distant carriage was a rare, ghostly clatter of hooves on cobblestones, quickly swallowed by the muffling gloom. Here, in our small sanctuary, the world was reduced to the warm circle of light cast by the fire. The flames danced behind the polished brass of the fender, throwing long, trembling shadows that crept up the walls and across the clutter of our shared existence. Stacks of well-loved books leaned precariously on the side table, and the morning paper lay in a disordered fan upon the carpet. I sat in my usual armchair, a medical journal open but unread on my lap. My eyes were drawn instead to the rain, which had begun to trace delicate, crooked paths down the window pane, each droplet a tiny, liquid explorer navigating the glass. My friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, was lost in his own peculiar form of repose. He was curled in his armchair, his long, thin form making it look smaller than it was. His violin lay across his knees, but his bow was still. His eyelids were low. But I knew he was not asleep. He was listening, as he always did, to the rhythm of the night, to the faint hiss of the gas, the sigh of the embers, the secret language of the city beyond the fog. It was then that Mrs. Hudson's footsteps sounded on the stairs. They were hesitant, a little slower than usual. A knock, soft and tentative, fell upon our door. "Come in," said Holmes, not moving. The door opened to admit our landlady, but she was not alone. Behind her, half hidden in the shadows of the hallway, stood a young woman. She was dressed in a simple, dark wool coat, and her hands were clasped tightly around a small, worn leather satchel. Mrs. Hudson ushered her in with a gentle murmur. "A visitor for you, Mr. Holmes. Miss Silverton," she announced, before retreating and closing the door, leaving the young woman standing on the edge of our rug, as if afraid to step further into the light. Holmes rose in an instant, his languor vanishing. "Pray come in, Miss Silverton, and sit by the fire. You are chilled." He guided her to a chair near the hearth. As she sat, the firelight revealed a face that was pale but composed. Her eyes, a deep brown, held a look of quiet bewilderment rather than alarm. She was not a woman in a panic, but one profoundly puzzled by the world. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice soft and clear. "I was told you're the one to see when things do not make sense, when the world shifts just a little, and you cannot explain why." Holmes resumed his seat, steepling his fingers. "A most apt description, Miss Silverton. The world is full of shifts and subtle changes. The task is to find the hinge upon which they turn. Now, tell us about your world." She took a breath, steadying herself. "It is my father, Professor Silverton. He is a philologist, you see. He spends his days in the company of ancient texts, dead languages. He is the most orderly, predictable man in all of London. For 30 years, his routine has been as fixed as the stars. And yet," Holmes prompted, his eyes gleaming in the firelight, "and yet, for the past week, there has been a dislocation, a small one. Every morning, for as long as I can remember, he rises at 7:30. He descends to the dining room at 8, and he reads the newspaper until his breakfast is brought in at 1:15. He does not touch the newspaper before his breakfast." I leaned forward, intrigued. A story about a displaced newspaper was not the stuff of the sensational crime reports. 3 mornings ago, I entered the dining room at 8:05. The newspaper was there, in its usual place, but it was open. He had not yet come downstairs. My father would never open the paper and then leave it. It is a trifle, I know, but then yesterday it happened again. And this morning, the paper was not only open, but a small, obscure article had been clipped from it, cleanly with a pair of scissors. She reached into her satchel and produced a folded newspaper, holding it out to Holmes. He took it, his long fingers tracing the neat, rectangular hole on page 5. "And you asked your father about this?" Holmes inquired, his eyes scanning the remaining text on the page. "I did. He looked at me as if I were speaking in one of his ancient tongues. He said he knew nothing of it, and seemed irritated that I would suggest he had developed such an untidy habit. He is not a man who lies, Mr. Holmes." He was genuinely perplexed, and that is what frightens me. Not the missing clipping, but his confusion. It is as if a tiny piece of our life has been stolen, and he cannot see the empty space it left behind. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his gaze lost in the flames. The clock ticked on. 5, 10, 15 seconds. "The article," he said at last, not looking at her. "Do you recall what it was about?" Miss Silverton shook her head. I did not think to look. I only saw the whole. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, your almanac. The date, if you please." I fetched a small leather-bound book from the shelf and found the page. "It is the 17th of November." 17th! Holmes murmured. He turned back to the young woman. "Miss Silverton, your father's work. Is he currently studying any particular text?" "Yes," she said, a new light in her eyes. "He has been utterly consumed for a month by a folio from a monastery in Bavaria. It is a 12th century chronicle, written in an obscure dialect. He says it is full of riddles and marginalia." Holmes smiled, a thin, satisfied curve of his lips. He rose and walked to his bookshelf, selecting a heavy, leather-bound volume. He brought it to the lamp and began to leaf through its pages. "The human mind, Watson, is a fascinating mechanism. It seeks patterns even when none exist. But it also creates ruts, deep channels of habit that are almost impossible to deviate from. Professor Silverton's mind is in such a rut. He has read the morning paper at breakfast for 30 years. He would no more think of opening it beforehand than he would of wearing his shoes on the wrong feet." He found his page. "Aha! Here we are. November the 17th. On this day in the year of our Lord 1187, a manuscript known as the Codex Sylvanus was reported stolen from the library of the Abbey of St. Gallen. It was never recovered. The chronicler notes the work contained a cipher, the key to which was said to be found in the margin of a page, a key that would unlock a secret, though its nature is lost to time." He closed the book and looked at Miss Silverton, whose face was a mask of astonishment. "Your father," Holmes explained gently, "is not the only one interested in old ciphers. Another person, someone who knows his habits, his routine, knows that the one thing he will not read before breakfast is a newspaper. It was a perfect blind spot. This person, under the cover of early morning, lets himself into your home. He knows exactly where the paper is left. He searches it not for news, but for any mention of old manuscripts, of lost codes. This morning he found it, a small article, perhaps a filler piece from Provincial Scholar, mentioning the anniversary of the theft of the Codex Sylvanus, a piece of information of immense interest to him. He clipped it out and left as silently as he came." "But who?" Miss Silverton breathed. "And why would they do such a thing?" "A rival scholar, most likely," Holmes said, his voice calm and quiet. "Someone working on a similar puzzle, who knows your father is the leading expert. They are not a thief, for they stole only information. They are a shadow, a reader of your father's mind. They knew he would not see the clipping. They knew the one moment of the day when his attention was elsewhere." Miss Silverton sat back in her chair, the tension slowly leaving her shoulders. The mystery, so unsettling in its ambiguity, now had a shape, a logic. It was not a ghost in the house, but a man, a covetous, clever man. "What shall I do?" she asked. "Nothing," said Holmes, with a gentle wave of his hand. "Tell your father. He will be amused, I think, to know his routines are so predictable. As for his rival, he will grow bolder. Perhaps he will make a mistake, and when he does, he will find that the professor's daughter is a keener observer than he ever imagined. Good night, Miss Silverton." She rose, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. You have given me back my peace of mind." After she had gone, the silence of the room seemed deeper, more profound. Holmes returned to his chair and picked up his violin. He drew the bow gently across the strings, producing a single long, resonant note that hung in the air and then faded. He played then not a tune, but a series of soft, wandering phrases. It was the sound of a puzzle solved, of a mind at rest. I watched the fire, its flames lower now, a bed of deep orange embers that pulsed with gentle heat. Outside, the rain had softened to a mere whisper against the glass. The fog pressed against the window, but it could not enter. The world and its small, strange mysteries were out there in the dark. But in here, there was only the quiet, the warmth, and the soft, fading notes of a lullaby for the mind. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked on, a loyal, unhurried heart beating in the stillness of the night. And slowly, peacefully, the embers turned to ash, and Baker Street fell into a deep and dreamless sleep.